Breaking right now. US magazines have turned on Harry and Meghan. And Newsweek is looking into the shocking reason why. Brittany from the Royal News Network posted on this. It seems like members of the media who tried to run interference for Meghan simply can't anymore. The cat's out of the bag, and the reports of bad behavior are too deafening to ignore. Now, I'm absolutely fascinated by the fact that it was the US magazines that burst Harry and Meghan's bubble, because, of course, reporters like me here in the UK had for so long been telling the truth about the actions of Harry and Meghan, but for some reason, maybe it was because of the woke tendency, maybe it was because of Black Lives Matter, maybe it was because things are much more on the left when it comes to the coverage out of New York and California. The magazines were not prepared to catch up. But it really has changed. And even Jack Royston, the royal correspondent for Newsweek, who is behind this article, has done an absolute 180, because for a long time he was a propagandist for Harry and Meghan. But now he writes that Prince Harry and Meghan Markle's US empire has been under mounting pressure after a series of high-profile articles in American magazines. The Duke and Duchess of Sussex have long hated the British media and framed their declining popularity in the UK as a product of tabloids poisoning the well of public opinion. However, more recently, US magazines have been the outlets throwing the Sussexes into crisis mode. Let me bring in the aforementioned Brittany from the Royal News Network now. And Brittany, it is really worth looking through this article and exactly the key moments where the American media changed their position on Harry and Meghan, starting with the cut. Meghan of Montecito. On the surface, Brittany, it was a positive profile piece. But the argument that Newsweek makes is actually this was the beginning of the turn in the mainstream media.
That's right. Dan Wootton just revealed that major American outlets like Us Weekly and Newsweek are now reporting the truth about Meghan and Harry's bad behavior. This is huge because for years, we've been gaslit by the corporate media, told that Meghan and Harry were victims of racism, royal cruelty, and conservative oppression. But guess what? The truth always comes out. All right, let's start with the biggest bombshell of the night. US mainstream media, which once protected Meghan and Harry like they were royalty, no pun intended, has finally turned against them. For years, American outlets like People magazine, The New York Times, and CNN have been running defense for Meghan and Harry. Every time they were criticized, the media would call it racism, blame the British monarchy, claim Meghan was the victim of right-wing attacks. But suddenly that shield has disappeared.
Yes, it definitely was. I remember reading through the article at the time and going, oh my gosh, there's so many weird things in there. Like her trying to grunt to reflect like the sound or the emotion she was feeling or something. And I think you get the sense from that particular article that the author was like, okay, I see the image Meghan wants to project, but when I spend time with her, I see a different side here. So the two things aren't connecting. So she was very subtle in how she did it because it was positive and glowing, you could say, but also these little weird things like seeming like she says, oh, I go to pick up my kids all the time. And then they were all surprised to see her there. So there were just little inconsistencies, thrones in their office and stuff really did portray them, I think, in a negative light. And that just started sort of eroding things. But what I think is interesting about Jack Royston is I think his catalyst was really Harry's situation with African parks, because Jack Royston, if I remember correctly, has written quite a bit on that and how that there just seemingly wasn't any action from Harry. And the real problem, of course, for Harry and Meghan has always been themselves. They are their worst enemies. What they say, what they do is always contrasted with the reality of the situation. And so I think what is happening with the US publications is that I think they kind of bought into the idea that the negative coverage of Harry and Meghan was only due to racism. Obviously, that played into BLM and everything like that. But now that that's sort of ebbing away, people are coming to the realization is like, hey, no, things aren't totally right here. And those who are within the industry, especially Hollywood, I'm sure have a lot more reports of bad behavior. And so they're like, we can't hide this anymore. It's there. Everybody's talking about it, and it's just the reality of the situation. And unfortunately for them, Hollywood enables, you could say, a lot of bad behavior. But usually you have to have a decent amount of talent, and Harry and Meghan just don't seem to have much in the industry that they're in.
And I mean, recently the cut has totally turned. They're not even hiding it anymore because, of course, after Polo, they ran that famous headline which had cut through in the mainstream media: Harry and Meghan's projects can't stop flopping. And I think, Brittany, there is one of those things that the mainstream media can try for a long time to drive a particular narrative, but eventually the truth has to catch up even to them. But there were
It
other
does.
examples which Newsweek tackle. So I think the next one was Variety magazine, Brittany. And this was really interesting because, of course, Variety is one of those Bibles in Hollywood. It really doesn't turn on stars very much. But the magazine made it clear that Meghan 2.0 was just not working.
And according to Dan Wootton, even journalists who once ran interference for Meghan and Harry are now backtracking. One of the biggest examples? Jack Royston of Newsweek. 4 years, Royston was one of Meghan and Harry's biggest defenders, constantly writing glowing pieces about their so-called bravery in leaving the royal family. Now, he's writing articles about how their US empire is crumbling. That's right, the same people who built them up are now calling them out. So what changed? Why are these left-wing celebrity-worshipping media outlets finally admitting the truth? Because they can't hide it anymore.
It wasn't. And they were all sort of seeing the writing on the wall. And again, because Variety is an industry publication, I'm sure they're hearing from WME, which Meghan signed with. And they actually, I think, did an article in conjunction with that, with Variety and that huge spread that they did on her as well. And so they're hearing all these things going on. And then you can't avoid the reality of the numbers. And all of Hollywood knows as well. Like, I love documentaries. I have found all of theirs to be a bore. They're overly bloated, they lack focus, and they just don't seem to be able to catch the story. And I think Hollywood as well is sort of not in the same way, but a bit has that royal family tendency where they want people they know can keep confidences. And Harry and Meghan went on Netflix and blasted to the entire world how awful their family was. And the people in Hollywood are sitting there thinking, well, what's going to happen to us if we get on their bad side? So best to keep them at arm's length in the first place because they don't want to deal with the backlash of, let's say, getting on the wrong side of Harry and Meghan. But I think as well, the dismal performances they have done on multiple levels, how difficult they are to work with, all of that is getting in the industry. Everybody wants to keep them at arm's length. Nobody is impressed. We need, I don't know, Meghan 3.0, 4.0, whatever she's on at this point. But I think Meghan, to be successful, she needs a fair amount of self-reflection at this point. And that seems to be something she is incapable of doing so far.
Then Newsweek actually credits themselves, and I think this is fair enough, Brittany, because remember, they were the first organisation stateside to actually run detailed polling into the popularity of Harry and Meghan. Again, it was something that many British outlets had conducted, but I think it was a moment for Newsweek to actually wake up and think, goodness me, the people who we're writing for really don't like these guys, and there's probably good reason for it.
Exactly. And Dan, you saw everything that they did to the royal family. So did everybody else in the world. And people aren't dumb. They see this acting out and they're like, well, I would feel terrible if my family members treated me this way. Harry was close to his brother. Now he's not. She seems to be the catalyst for a lot of bad behavior. And so people observe and they were catching on to this situation. And I will say in the United States, I don't meet too many people, really anyone who ever really likes her. But Hollywood and definitely in Los Angeles area and New York, it would probably be a bit different and a couple other liberal hotspots around the country. But the United States is huge. And there's this area called the flyover country because, you know, people fly from New York to Los Angeles, but there's this entire country in the middle there. And I don't think in much of the middle section of the country or elsewhere, people really like them that much. And the polling reflects that. So no matter how much the Sussex squad moans and calls to the contrary, they're just not well liked. And they haven't done anything to sort of right the ship yet at this point. So it's just going to keep getting worse and worse for them.
Now let's talk about why the US media protected Meghan and Harry for so long. Dan Wootton explains it perfectly. For years, American journalists ignored reality because of their obsession with woke ideology. This is why, no matter how many times Meghan and Harry were caught lying, the media continued pushing their victim narrative. Remember the Oprah interview? They let Meghan imply the royal family was racist, even though she provided zero evidence. Remember the Netflix series? They let Harry claim he was a prisoner in the monarchy, even though he grew up in absolute luxury. And now suddenly they can't keep up the lie anymore? Please. The reality is they milked the Sussexes for clicks and sympathy, but now that they're irrelevant, they're tossing them aside.
Then I would argue the most damning, Brittany, and Newsweek, I think, agrees, is The Hollywood Reporter, because that article confirmed all of the reporting that people like me had done for years. But what it did was translate Meghan's bullying behaviour towards staff from Buckingham Palace, from the UK, to Hollywood, to Los Angeles, to Montecito, and it took away every argument that both Meghan and Meghan's friends and Meghan's allies had made for some time, which was there was a cultural difference. Brits had struggled to understand Meghan. She wasn't a bully. She was just American. That was sort of the argument. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, all of these staff members who are having huge issues with Meghan, as revealed by The Hollywood Reporter, are American themselves.
Exactly. And it came from the Hollywood Reporter, again, another industry insider. And it said a lot of what I had been suggesting as well, which is that they make poor decisions, that she always thinks she's right. She can't take advice. Like it was very simple there. I mean, I think maybe the article itself was probably less than 500 words, but it said everything that people like yourself and other people had been reporting for years, especially in the United Kingdom. So it sort of destroyed this argument that they had that was basically just the press hated them and wanted to smear them. But in fact, a press within their own industries, like, no, people generally like him was the assessment, and they just think she's terrible. That was literally a quote, she's terrible. They don't like her. They tend to like him is their employees' experience, but he also enables her worst behavior. And so the cultural differences, nothing to do with Harry and Meghan's problems. Harry and Meghan's problems have always been Meghan, most notably, and Harry for enabling Meghan. So they can't get away from it because the problem is them themselves. So the Hollywood Reporter, like I did a video calling Buckingham Palace, the British press, you guys were 100% right. And the American press was sort of went along with their side. It was definitely in the wrong. And people were really starting to catch on to that.
Yeah, totally. Because the problem is for a magazine like The Hollywood Reporter, actually, once they allow their journalists to start reporting, which is obviously in their name, they're going to keep doing so. So they ran another piece recently. Is Meghan Markle's new cooking show her last chance at Netflix? But the whole presentation is very much in a way that seems to be mocking Meghan. And of course, that was very, very different to what it used to be like. But Brittany, interestingly, there's also an increasing focus here in the UK on Prince William's own battles with the media.
Now let's get to the real reason why the US media is finally jumping ship. Meghan and Harry's public image has completely collapsed. Let's review. The Spotify firing. Meghan and Harry signed a $20 million deal with Spotify. They produced one podcast. Spotify dropped them and called them grifters. The Netflix disaster. Their Netflix docuseries started strong but quickly lost viewers. Harry's spared memoir became a meme. People mocked his whining about his childhood. The South Park humiliation. South Park roasted Meghan and Harry, calling them demanding privacy while seeking attention. The episode was so brutal that Meghan and Harry allegedly threatened legal action. This is why the media is turning on them, because they're no longer useful. They've been exposed as frauds. The public sees them for what they are, privileged, whiny elites who attack family, tradition, and truth. So what's the takeaway? The US media protected Meghan and Harry for years, but now they can't keep up the lie. They were propped up because they fit the leftist woke agenda. Now that they're irrelevant, the media is exposing them. This is a lesson in how the corporate press manipulates the truth to fit a political narrative.